Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks at Google. I'm Nadia Gill, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Dr. William Davis is a cardiologist and a New York Times best-selling author of the groundbreaking book, Wheat Belly, and 3 other New York Times bestsellers, such as Wheat Belly Cookbook and Wheat Belly Total Health. He's written 7 books about how to stay healthy or be on your way to health. Today, he's going to talk to us about his new book, Super Gut. Dr. Davis is a graduate of the St. Louis University School of Medicine with training in internal medicine and cardiovascular disease. He also has advanced training in angioplasty at the Case Western Reserve University Hospitals, where he also served as director of the Cardiovascular Fellowship and assistant professor of medicine. Please welcome our speaker, Dr. William Davis, for his Google Talk, Super Gut, a 4-week plan to reprogram your microbiome, restore health, and lose weight. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you to the Google Talks team. So I practiced cardiology for many years. As you can see, I've drifted a long way off from that kind of thing. But I want to pass on some of the very important lessons I've learned over the last several years that started with this idea of eliminating wheat and grains because of what agribusiness did to that plant, essentially created a new laboratory. But it left some residual problems. And I'm always looking for better solutions so that you can be healthy without the doctor or the healthcare system. So I try to champion ways that you and I can be healthy without the interference of the healthcare system. That's what SuperGut is taking further. We all know that we've changed the external environment. We've got an acidifying ocean, the pH is dropping, the coral reefs are dissolving, the polar ice caps are shrinking. You're no stranger to violent storms and wildfires. Well, the same kind of dramatic change in the external environment has occurred in our internal environment, specifically in the internal microbiome. That is, the collection of microbes that live in and on our body. Now, of course, you don't have wildfires and hurricanes in your body, right? The changes that have occurred in the human microbiome, specifically the intestinal microbiome, where most creatures are concentrated, is that we've lost species. We've lost important species that did perform functions, healthy functions for the human body. And we've also allowed proliferation of unhealthy species. Now, we're only going to talk about the first category today, that is lost species, just for the sake of time. And in future, you can maybe we'll do another presentation about the proliferation of unhealthy species, because that's a really important topic as well. But today we'll focus on this idea that we've lost species important to human health. So as the years have passed, over the tens of thousands of years, there's been a dramatic reduction in so-called species diversity in the human intestinal microbiome. That is, we've lost numerous species, hundreds, maybe more species, and modern people have very little diversity, much fewer numbers of microbes, much fewer different species. Well, why is that? Why have we lost these important microbes? Well, antibiotics. So it's not uncommon. By age 40, you've probably taken, on average, 30 courses of antibiotics. For every 1,000 Americans, 800 prescriptions for antibiotics are written every year, 800 per 1,000. And the effects of antibiotics are not transient. They can often be long-term or even permanent. A third of Americans are now born by C-section and don't have the benefit of passing through the birth canal to acquire a mom's microbiome. More and more children are being formula fed because of the pressures of modern life on mothers. We're exposed to food additives in processed foods, especially emulsifying agents. These are compounds like carboxymethylcellulose or polysorbate 80, synthetic sweeteners in your diet cola, such as aspartame and sucralose, also change the microbiome dramatically. Many drugs change the intestinal microbiome, especially drugs that block stomach acid, like Prilosec and Protonix and ranitidine. Statin cholesterol drugs change the intestinal microbiome. These common anti-inflammatory drugs are very destructive, but they also change the human microbiome. Even antidepressants change the human microbiome. How about water that contains chlorine or fluoride? Or how about heavy metals like mercury in fish or cadmium in shellfish? All those factors also dramatically change the intestinal microbiome. We all swim in a sea, sadly, of herbicides and pesticides in our food, air, and water. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, is also an antibiotic, but it's an antibiotic of the worst kind because it kills healthy species and doesn't kill unhealthy species. So glyphosate essentially selects for the species you don't want. And then, of course, if you inherit at least some of your microbiome from your parents, grandparents, well, they had disrupted microbiomes also. So this effect of a disrupted microbiome compounds with each passing generation. It gets worse and worse. So modern people have lost numerous microbes from our gastrointestinal tracts. Now, one of the most important species, so there's many species lost, but today we'll talk about two species we've lost. One of the most important is Lactobacillus reuteri, named after the German scientist who discovered this microbe, Dr. Gerhard Reuter. Well, this is a ubiquitous mammalian microbe. So if we were to sequence the intestinal microbes in indigenous populations, say in New Guinea, these are people who didn't take antibiotics, don't chlorinate their drinking water, don't take statin cholesterol drugs, don't take ibuprofen. They live out in the wild. They shower, they bathe in a river. They dig into dirt for roots and tubers. They spear or club an animal to eat it, often eat the intestine and liver raw. Well, these people all have Lactobacillus reuteri. 100% of the population sequenced and looking for reuteri have this microbe. Likewise, your dog, the mouse in your cellar, the raccoon outside, the chipmunk outside your window, they all have reuteri. But it's us as modern people who have lost it. The vast majority of people, best estimate, over 90% of modern people have lost Lactobacillus reuteri for all those reasons I listed, especially antibiotics, because Lactobacillus reuteri seems to be unusually susceptible to antibiotics. So here we are, 2022, most of us have lost this very important microbe. But it also can serve as an illustration, a prototype for what happens when you restore it. We're going to restore it, though, by an odd technique. We're going to ferment it in yogurt. It doesn't have to be yogurt, it can be other foods if you don't like to be exposed to dairy, but let's use dairy only because it's a good way to illustrate this principle and because dairy is a very forgiving fermentation vehicle. But we're not going to ferment it like other people do when they make yogurt. We're going to ferment for a long time. That is, in this case, 36 hours. Here's the curve of bacterial reproduction. Along the x-axis, you can see the amount of hours. Well, if we allow this microbe, so Lactobacillus reuteri doubles every 3 hours. So microbes don't have sexual reproduction, right? There's no mommy and daddy microbes, right? So they have asexual reproduction. That is, one microbe becomes two becomes four, and so on. So if reuteri requires 3 hours to double, we're going to ferment for 12 doublings or 36 hours. And you can see the shape of the curve that there's not a real increase in microbial counts until about hour 33. And then at hour 36, when we stop fermentation, we've performed a method called flow cytometry on our yogurts, and we get around 260 billion counts of reuteri per half cup serving. Now compare that to how it's done in commercial yogurt production, the stuff you buy in the supermarket. One, they're not making it with reuteri. They're making it with some other microbes that are kind of ho-hum, by the way, not very interesting, don't have many interesting effects. So we're going to choose a much more interesting and essential microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri. We're going to ferment for a long time. But look what they do in commercial yogurt production. They typically ferment for 4 hours. Well, you can imagine if your microbe doubles every 3 hours, after 4 hours, you've got nothing. A lot of home yogurt makers will ferment for 12 hours. You can still see it's along the flat part of the curve. You've got nothing. It's this prolonged fermentation we're going to use that I believe is the reason why you get these very large health benefits when you do this. So how does this work, and what does it do? So we're going to ferment Lactobacillus reuteri, replacing a microbe lost by the majority of modern people. It takes up residence, oddly, in the upper GI tract as well as the colon. Most microbes prefer the conditions in the human colon, but this microbe likes the upper GI tract. And that's very important for another issue, and that is one of the problems that we won't talk much about today is that stool species like E. coli and Pseudomonas and Klebsiella, these are species that are typically supposed to stay in the colon, and modern people have ascended into the small bowel. Well, this is a great advantage for Reuteri because it takes up residence in the small bowel and it inhibits the proliferation of those stool microbes and tries to protect your small bowel. So Reuteri takes up residence in the entire length of the GI tract. It sends a signal by the vagus nerve, through the vagus nerve, up into the chest, through the neck, up to the brain. And it tells your brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands, tells your brain to release the hormone oxytocin. Now, I bet a lot of you have heard of oxytocin because it's often labeled the hormone of love and affection and empathy. So what happens when we do this? Prolonged fermentation with this unique microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri, lost by the majority of modern people. Well, as you'd expect, people experience an increase in empathy, a desire for connecting with other people, greater ability to see another person's point of view, reduction in social anxiety in social settings, like an office party or a neighborhood get-together. The ladies love this part. There is an explosion in the deposition of collagen in the dermis. And as a result, people begin to lose their wrinkles. It takes 8 or more weeks to start, but it's a wonderful natural means of getting rid of aging skin, and skin becomes moister also. There's an acceleration of healing. If there's a skin wound, for instance, whether it's you cut yourself by accident or scraped your knee or had a post-operative incision, healing time is cut by about 35%. There's a wonderful reduction in appetite. Food still tastes great, but you can walk past that plate of donuts at the office without even looking at it. It puts you in control of appetite and your diet and food choice. I'm a chronic insomniac. I have a hard time sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours. I'm watching TV, reading books in the middle of the night. I eat the Reuteri yogurt. I sleep like a baby, 9 hours straight through, vivid, colorful dreams. And those of us who wear the various actigraphic devices, like an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or a Whoop, we see about a 20% or more increase in the duration of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. That's the restorative phase of sleep, you may know, during which we organize our thoughts, run through traumatic events, and maintain mental health better. So an extension of REM could be very, very important. There is a wonderful restoration of youthful muscle and strength. So as we age, we lose about a third, sometimes more, of our strength and muscle mass. Well, Reuteri via oxytocin can restore that. Now, if you couple this with a little strength training, you'll be astounded at the results. You can gain pounds and pounds and pounds of muscle. So if there's weight gain on this, it's not from fat, it's loss of fat coupled with increase in muscle. And the ladies, especially a point for females, there is a marked preservation of bone density, protecting you long-term from osteopenia, osteoporosis. There is a heightening of the immune response. This may be among the most potent things we can do to boost immunity against viruses, bacteria, and potentially improve immunosurveillance against the appearance of cancer cells. Now, think about this. Smoother skin, accelerated healing, deeper sleep, restoration of youthful muscle and strength and bone density. Is this age reversal? I think it is. Now, this is anecdote, but if you see all the people in my following, people who follow my programs who do this, you will see people who look younger. And of course, if we dug deeper, we would see that they have many aspects of youthfulness, like that increase in muscle. Here's a woman, one of the first people who did this, a woman named Leslie. She was 65 years old at the time. This is a couple of years ago. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, she did more than Reuteri. She did my full program, which involves elimination of all wheat and grains, this agribusiness garbage that they created. We replaced nutrients, a handful of nutrients lacking in modern life, like magnesium, for instance, because we drink filtered water, which removes all magnesium. Vitamin D, because we live indoor lives, the most part, may live in a northern climate where the sun is weak, and many of us are over 40 when we lose the ability to activate vitamin D in the skin, largely. So here she is at 65. She did the program, lost a bunch of weight. Here she is a few months later. She's 65. So she's not only younger, but she's also healthier. But you can see the dramatic effects, especially evident on the skin. So that's the effects of restoring one lost species, Lactobacillus reuteri. Let's talk about another lost species, lost by most infants, babies, Bifidobacterium Infantis. So Bifidobacterium Infantis is very important for an infant's neurological development and growth. But 90% of infants don't have it anymore. And Infantis is important because if a baby breastfeeds, which is a very great advantage for the infant, breast milk contains something called human milk oligosaccharides, which are essential for an infant's growth and neurological development. Well, if the baby doesn't have Infantis, it's going to struggle to digest those oligosaccharides, more likely to have watery stools, more frequent stools, and it won't grow as well, and it won't have as better neurological development. Now, how many human milk oligosaccharides are included in synthetic formula? 0. So, being breastfed and having Bifidobacterium infantis colonize the infant's gastrointestinal tract is a huge advantage. So what happened? What happened to Bifidobacterium infantis? Well, many moms, many young women who become pregnant and deliver a child didn't have it themselves. Maybe this woman took antibiotics for a urinary tract infection. And if she doesn't have it, she can't pass it on to the child. I don't know if you know this, but mother and child are virtually always given antibiotics at time of delivery. Even with a natural vaginal birth, mom is given an antibiotic and the baby is given an antibiotic to prevent beta streptococcal infection. So both mom and baby come away from a hospital delivery having received antibiotics, and one of the casualties can be loss of this crucial species, Bifidobacterium infantis. Of course, if mom delivers the baby via C-section, which is a third of all pregnancies and deliveries now, the baby is deprived of passage through the birth canal and does not acquire Infantis and other microbes by that route. And then, of course, given pressures of modern life and the difficulties for modern women to continue to breastfeed for 2 years, which would be ideal, children are often hastily transitioned to bottle feeding and synthetic formula, in which case they're not getting human milk oligosaccharides and then don't have Infantis. So what happens when you restore this lost microbe, lost by 90% of modern infants? Well, the baby is better able to use the nutrients in breast milk, and there's less colic, less fussiness. The pH of the infant's poop approximates the pH of 100 years ago, when people were healthier than we are today. And there's less diaper rash as a result. Babies are more likely to sleep through the night. Isn't that incredible? And they're likely to take longer naps. They have 50% fewer bowel movements, thereby 50% fewer diaper changes for mom and dad. So an average of 4 per day down to 2 per day. There's an incredible and a very impressive 93% reduction in unhealthy bacterial species. These are the species like E. coli and Klebsiella we mentioned. And there's less risk of this awful condition called necrotizing enterocolitis. More common in in premature babies, but can occur in full-term newborns also. This is a devastating diagnosis where the baby has to have part of their intestine removed, and there's a 30% likelihood of not surviving, 30% mortality. Restoring Bifidobacterium Infantis quite markedly reduces the likelihood of an infant developing necrotizing enterocolitis. So big effects of restoring this microbe lost by the majority of infants. Now, as the child becomes older, it's less likely to have asthma, less nasal allergies. There's less likelihood of developing an autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's thyroiditis or lupus. They tend to have less abdominal complaints from irritable bowel syndrome, and they have a higher IQ. They're less likely to become obese. So this one microbe restored to a newborn and a young infant has lifelong. This is not just about fewer diaper changes. It is about that too, but it's about lifelong consequences for this person. Here's a profile of what happens to the microbes in stool. On the right, in the purple, represents the proliferation of Infantis. In other words, Infantis, when restored, comes to dominate the microbiome of the infant. This is not true in adults, it's true in infants, but it illustrates just how critical it is for an infant to have that microbe restored. Now, let's go one better. So you could give it to the baby. Why not give it to mom? Why not? That's the strain that has all this evidence, the EVC001 strain. It's available commercially as a product called Avivo, EVIVO. I have no reason to tell you that. I have no association with the company. It's just a cool product. So we get this microbe, and then as we talked about with Reuteri, we put it through extended fermentation to allow repeated bacterial doublings to get bigger numbers than provided in the low potency probiotic product. And mom eats it before she delivers a child, right? She can eat it when she's not pregnant. She can eat it when she's pregnant. By taking it orally, she's going to populate her birth canal and her breasts, as well as her oral cavity, skin. So she'll be a vehicle for Bifidobacterium Infantis. And when delivery time comes, she gives that microbe to her baby as it was supposed to have been done, right? The baby gets it by passage through the birth canal, breastfeeding, and contact with its mother. Now, even mom. So even though you want to do this for the benefits to the infant, mom gets some benefits too. She experiences a reduction in the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, like bloating and diarrhea and abdominal discomfort. It can reduce the symptoms of ulcerative colitis, like diarrhea and abdominal pain. It reduces fatty liver. That's a whole other conversation. It's very interesting, by the way. But this can be one of the things you can do to reduce the damage to your liver through fatty liver. And even mood can improve. Less anxiety, less likelihood of depression. So even mom benefits by restoring Bifidobacterium Infantis, most important for infants. So we can put microbes to work, and we can jack up the benefits by this unique process of fermentation. It's very easy, by the way. So it's in my Super Gut book, how to do this. It's just a few steps. But don't get overwhelmed by this. If you say, oh, I can't believe there's too many microbes to replace, don't get scared by this. Think of it like going to a restaurant. When you walk into a restaurant and the waitress gives you a menu, do you freak out and say, there's no way I can order all these appetizers and main dishes and desserts? No, of course not, right? You pick and choose the dishes you like. You can approach the microbiome in the same way. Pick and choose the microbe you want for the effect you want. I've only told you about two, but if you want to have smoother skin, accelerated healing, like other people better, you should ferment Lactobacillus reuteri. If you are a mom contemplating pregnancy, woman contemplating pregnancy, or you're in the midst of pregnancy, or you have a newborn or a young child, think about replacing Bifidobacterium Infantis for all those incredible effects that include better sleep, fewer bowel movements, less potential for asthma, irritable bowel syndrome, and other health conditions, and a higher IQ. What if you want to increase your creativity and your mental clarity? Well, maybe you should make yogurt out of Lactobacillus brevis, because that microbe produces something called phenylethylamine. And that is a nootropic, something that makes you smarter, a little faster on your feet, a little more creative, better able to synthesize data, and it makes you a little bit happier. What if you want to reduce arthritis pain in your knee or hips? Cultivate Bacillus coagulans. You see where I'm going with this? Treat it like a menu. Choose the microbe you want for the benefit you want. Okay, that's in a nutshell what my Super Gut book is about, and lots of other things. But I hope that I enticed your appetite. I started you thinking about just how powerful, fascinating, fun, and effective it is to address your microbiome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. That was fantastic. We have so many questions in the chat. So I'll start, asking you the questions. And if we run out of time, I will contact you and send you the questions, and we'll contact back the people who sent the questions. So let's do this. A question from Miriam Legieri. Any sweetener that has proven to not negatively influence the microbiome? I also want to know that.
So we avoid the synthetic sweeteners, sucralose, saccharin, and aspartame, because we know with pretty good evidence that they introduce quite dramatic disruptive effects on the microbiome. But so far, stevia in its various forms, monk fruit, allulose, and probably erythritol really don't seem to have much effect. Something like stevia, you use in such tiny quantities that it's unlikely to have an effect, and the evidence suggests it really doesn't have much effect. And allulose, in particular, is not just a sweetener that's non-caloric. It also has some modest prebiotic fiber qualities. That is, it feeds bacteria. So it may actually be positive for your microbiome. So we use stevia, allulose, monk fruit, and erythritol.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question from Ian Mulholland. He used vancomycin for an infection, but now the gut is seriously out of whack. Any recommendations for a protocol to restore gut balance post vancomycin?
So, Ian, there's not one answer, unfortunately, but let me make this point. One of the most, what I do is I ask people to think about their microbiome, their intestinal microbiome, like a backyard garden. So let's pretend it's May. Around here, more like June. I'm in Wisconsin. It's below zero right now. But think about a springtime garden. How do you do that? Well, maybe you lay out a 10 by 10 plot, right? Then you clear the soil. You pick out the rocks and the twigs and the weeds. Then you plant seeds. And then through the growing season, you water and fertilize your garden, right? And then at the end of the growing season, you'll have a bounty of zucchini and tomatoes and a squash, right? Same kind of principle applies to the microbiome. How do we clear the soil? Well, let's remove things that disrupt the soil. Those synthetic sweeteners, food additives like emulsifying agents in your salad dressing and ice cream. We filter our water to remove the chlorine and fluoride. We try to get off all those drugs. And by the way, you might have to find doctors who allow you to do that. Doctors are really good at putting people on medication. They suck at taking you off medications, right? So you got to find one who's willing to work with you and be your advocate, okay? So try to get off those medications. Minimize antibiotics. There's a time and place. Maybe the vancomycin was really necessary for a terrible infection. So there's a time and place where you have to do those things. If you had pneumococcal pneumonia and you have a fever of 104 and you can't breathe, you need an antibiotic. But you don't need an antibiotic. You have a scratchy throat, a viral upper respiratory, and you take an antibiotic just in case it becomes bacterial. That's not a good reason. The vast majority of prescribed antibiotics are prescribed inappropriately. That's important to know. We try to choose organic foods because they're less likely to have herbicide and pesticide residues. We never eat genetically modified foods because they have glyphosate and Bt toxin, both of which have microbiome implications. So there's a list of things. That sounds like a lot. It's really not that tough. It's a return to whole foods, right? Not packaged processed foods. It's trying to get off prescription medications, right? It's drinking real water, not stuff processed and chlorinated. So it's a return to that kind of lifestyle. Then we seed our microbiomes. The most important thing you can do to seed your microbiome, people think it's a probiotic. It's not. It may be in future, but the current crop of commercial probiotics are just haphazard collections of microbes. They don't think about what we just talked about, choosing the microbes that have these big outsized effects at higher numbers too, right? They just throw a bunch together and sell it as a commercial probiotic. So the best thing you can do to reseed your intestinal microbiome is to readopt fermented foods. In fact, a lot of this information comes from where Google is. It comes from the Sonnenbergs, Erica and Justin at Stanford. And they published a very important study, very insightful, just a few months ago, that showed that among the most important things you can do is eat a fermented food several times a day. These are foods like kimchi and kombucha and fermented sauerkraut, veggies you ferment on your kitchen counter, fermented meats. You know, when refrigeration was invented for home use in 1927 by Frigidaire, and they learned how to use Freon as a refrigerant, Americans forgot that they started to think of fermented foods as rotten food. Now, Europeans, by the way, and Asians are much better at maintaining an intake of fermented foods. But Americans, North Americans, have become very bad at this. Most people hardly ever, if ever, consume a fermented food. I'm not talking about booze. That's a different kind of fermentation. This is lactic acid fermentation. So bring back. Now, thankfully, it's getting easier and easier to buy these things. It's very easy to make. You can find out anywhere online. There's hundreds of websites that tell you how to ferment foods, including in my Super Gut book. It should cost you almost nothing. You don't have to buy special equipment. You do have to filter your water, right? Remove chlorine and fluoride. You can't use iodized salt. The iodine's antibacterial. Those two caveats. But then you put it on your counter and leave it there for days to weeks, and you restore microbes that way. And by the way, if you do buy commercial fermented foods, you want to make sure it says fermented or live cultures or some other indication that it has been fermented. Now, what I like to do, if I buy, say, some fermented pickles or fermented sauerkraut or some kimchi, I'll leave it on my kitchen counter for several days to several weeks to allow fermentation. Because when you buy something commercially, you know, to illustrate, let's pretend Nadia has a shoe factory, okay? And it takes her 2 weeks to make a pair of shoes. And her neighbor can make a pair of shoes in 30 minutes. Who's going to make more money? Well, sadly, her neighbor will, right? Because it's faster. Same thing in fermentation of foods. The manufacturer will try to ferment as briefly as possible. Like that yogurt manufacturer, 4 hours, nothing, right? So the same kind of principle applies here. They're going to cut back on fermentation time. So you can remedy that. You could call up the company and say, hey, I want you to ferment longer. They're not going to do it. So you can ferment longer on your kitchen counter and you'll, at first you're going to say, oh my God, it's going to go bad. It's going to go rotten. No, keep the lid on and you'll see that it will have higher, if you were to perform an analysis, you would see much higher microbial counts. So the most important thing you can do is include fermented foods in every meal. And a probiotic can be somewhat helpful. But probiotics will become better and more effective as they incorporate several important principles, such as including keystone species, that is, species important for other species like plankton in the ocean. Without plankton, there ain't no whales or jellyfish. You need plankton. Same principle in your intestinal microbiome. You need keystone species. Reuteri and Infantis are two keystone species. And then lastly, you want to water and fertilize your garden. That takes the form of these fibers, prebiotic fibers, polysaccharides. These are things that microbes need. If you don't feed them, bad things happen. By the way, that's one of the things happening, sadly, in all these people on the ketogenic diet who don't remain mindful of their prebiotic fiber intake. There's an odd phenomenon that occurs when you do that. So if you're eating lots of meats, fatty meats, green vegetables, but you're avoiding starchy things because you're low carb on a ketogenic diet, and you're not making it a point to get onions and garlic and shallots and asparagus and legumes, those are the sources of those prebiotic fibers. If you neglect that, something weird happens. There's a very beneficial species called Akkermansia muciniphila. When you deprive your microbiome of those fibers, lots of species die off or are reduced in numbers. Akkermansia, that has many beneficial effects, proliferates out of control. It comes to occupy 8%, 12%, 18%, as much as 24% of all microbes in the human intestinal tract. But so its real name, its full name, Akkermansia muciniphila, mucus lover. It starts to eat your intestinal mucus, causes colitis, allows breakdown products of bacteria enter the bloodstream. That's called endotoxemia. Very important. Endotoxemia, because when microbial breakdown products enter the bloodstream, it raises blood sugar, makes you gain weight. It leads to neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease, depression, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, skin diseases like rosacea. So don't make the mistake, whether we label it a carnivorous diet, a ketogenic diet, low carb, whatever you call it. Don't make the mistake of depriving your microbes, your friends, of the things they want to eat. So legumes, inulin fructooligosaccharides powder for convenience, you put in your coffee, the galacto-oligosaccharides in white beans, black beans, kidney beans, etc. Don't neglect those. Those are extremely important. So in answer to Ian's question, it's not just one thing, it's many things, right? Because we have to undo the damage we've done through a lifetime, right, of not doing these things.
Thank you, doctor. Wow. Yeah, I'm going to the store right after we speak to get some legumes. Okay, another question. We have so many from Val Ditsikiuk. Do bacteria in yogurt and other fermented foods survive stomach acid? How important it is to get many billions of bacteria in a serving of food versus 1 to 10 from the supplements?
So the vast majority of species chosen to be taken as a probiotic or as a yogurt have been tested for exactly that, the question Val is asking, for survival through stomach acid, stomach extremely acidic, and survival in bile. That's another thing, bile acids. And so Lactobacillus reuteri it survives to a great degree in stomach acid, in bile. Likewise, Bifidobacterium Infantis. In other words, you can recover substantial numbers in the stool. You don't retain. Some take up residence, some just pass through. So yes, they do survive. And by the way, be careful. I regret one thing here. Calling the Lactobacillus reuteri or the Infantis yogurt, it's not yogurt. If the FDA is listening, they would say, hey, don't call it yogurt, because by our definition, by the FDA's definition, yogurt is something made fermenting dairy with Lactobacillus bulgaricus or Streptococcus thermophilus, the two microbes traditionally used to make yogurt. Well, those are kind of ho-hum species. They don't do a whole lot. And of course, they're present in trivial numbers in commercial yogurt. So don't be confused by my mistake of calling what we do yogurt. I wasn't quite sure what to call it. We could call it a fermented dairy product or fermented food, but that's not very interesting. So we really shouldn't call it yogurt, but I'm not selling you yogurt, or I'm not selling it to you, so I don't have to adhere to FDA regulations. But you should know that when you buy yogurt, that's completely different than what you and I are talking about when we make yogurt.
Are there any regular medicines available in pharmacies to keep the intestinal flora? This is from Karim Bumarov. Sufficient to keep our biome healthy?
No. There are plenty of medications that disrupt the microbiome, but there are no medications that restore the microbiome. Well, people sometimes take that as bad news. I take it as great news, because I want to be freed of the tyranny of big pharma. I want to live naturally. I want to restore things. You know what? Here's a sad and rather cynical fact. The doctor should be an expert in nutrition, right? The doctor should be an expert in nutrients. The doctor should be an expert in the microbiome and help you achieve magnificent health without pharmaceuticals and procedures. Is that what healthcare is? No. Healthcare is about the practice of dispensing pharmaceuticals and procedures for the benefit of healthcare insiders. I know that's excessively cynical, but it is largely true, I believe. So I think it's great news that you and I are obtaining the insights, the strategies for us to take control of our own health, including our own microbiomes. So you don't need your doctor's permission to make Lactobacillus reuteri yogurt, right? You don't need your doctor's permission to avoid emulsifying agents in your salad dressing or ice cream. You don't need your doctor's permission to choose organic foods, right? These are things you do on your own. And don't be surprised if you get a lot of skepticism from your doctor who will say things like, probiotics have been shown to be ineffective or destructive. That is a glaring, I hear this a lot, by the way, from my colleagues. That is a glaring misinterpretation of one study that made headlines. This is not true. It is absolutely not. You can see, though, if you did like they did in that study, just pick any old anonymous probiotic and take it, is going to, imagine I said to Nadia, take this drug. Nadia says, what kind of drug? I'm not going to tell you. Nadia's going to say, get lost, Buster. I'm not going to take it. Why would you do that with probiotics? Here, take this probiotic. Well, what's in it? Oh, we don't know. We just put it together. It's a slapdash, haphazard collection of microbes. That is not how you create a probiotic, but that's what most current products are. So you and I are going to be smarter. If we do buy a commercial probiotic, we're going to choose ones that have specific properties, like they contain those keystone species. Even better, it's a collection of microbes that have been shown to have collaborative effects. Microbes, just like people, we don't live by ourselves, right? We live in families, clans, communities, neighborhoods. Bacteria do the same exact thing. And microbe A might produce something necessary for microbe B. Microbe B produces something essential for microbe C. Microbe C produces something microbe A likes. Right? So those microbes, those guilds or consortia, have not yet been fully mapped out. It's a work in progress. But a modern probiotic should have included some of those features. Because when you do that, when you can take it as a community of microbes, it has much bigger effects on the host, that is us.
No, this is great. And this takes us to our next question from David Gassior. How do we get Reuteri?
Oh, how do we get Lactobacillus reuteri? Well, I'm going to tell you a little secret. So I initially started doing this by getting a commercial strain. It comes from Sweden. It comes from a company called BioGaia, BioGaia. And I have no relationship with this company nor the product, okay? And you buy it as a product called Gastrus, Gastrus. That commercial product has 2 strains of Reuteri in it. And this was a strain looked at through very elegant studies that came out of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, from 2013 to 2017. And that was the group that initially this cancer group stumbled on these very incredible, interesting effects, such as thicker skin, dermal collagen, restoration of muscle in older mice, reduction of appetite, increased oxytocin. A lot of that got its start with those mouse studies at MIT. Well, those studies used that Gastrus product. Now, the Gastrus product was created for babies. So the dose is very low. So I got a hold of this commercial product, and that's what motivated me to make the yogurt. Prolonged fermentation, because we wanted much bigger numbers. And that's how we get to several hundred billion. And when thousands of people are eating this and experience all those effects that we talked about. Now, I have 8 strains I've gotten from commercial manufacturers. So these aren't all available retail yet. And I've experienced all these effects. This is anecdote, but I've experienced all these effects. One of the things I experience is being converted from a terrible insomniac to deep sleep, 9 hours straight through. Wow. I've experienced this with all strains. So my suspicion is that it's not unique to that product. It may be shared by many. Now we have a mouse trial set up and several human trials set up to prove this. Is there a strain of Reuteri that's better than another, or are they the same? And what's the quantity you require? Do you really need 260 billion, or can we just be happy with 100 billion or 50 billion? We don't know. So we're going to look at all that in our own animal and human work. So stay tuned to that conversation, and we'll be reporting that over the next year or two or so. In the meantime, you would not go wrong by getting that gastrous product, but you'll have to do the amplification, the yogurt step. There are some other strains I'm not too fond of. There's a strain called 30242, which I think has the oxytocin effect, but it doesn't produce that bacteriocin. Remember that issue? If Reuteri likes to take up residence in the upper GI tract and protect you from those nasties trying to climb up from the colon, it does so by producing bacteriocin, or several actually. Well, the 30242 strain that is also commercially available does not produce a bacteriocin. So it's not as good, I think, for this purpose, for these general purposes. So I would go with the gastrous until I can tell you, hey, I've got a strain that's better, or here's another strain that you can get. My suspicion is there are strains that are better at it, but that's just my speculation now.
Great. Thank you so much, Doctor. And this is a question that I'm sure a lot of people have from Elizabeth Ranking. Are there any non-dairy alternatives which give you the same level of bacteria present in the yogurt?
Yeah, so there's many things you can ferment. So I'm guilty of, pushing on the dairy, but I don't mean to. A lot of people want to avoid dairy. You can ferment canned coconut milk. Now, there's a couple extra steps because when you use canned coconut milk, it tends to separate. The fat tends to separate. But it's a great vehicle, but you'll have to add a couple additional steps. We add guar gum to keep it suspended, keep the fat from separating. And we also blend it to thicken it up. So that recipe is in the Super Gut book. It's also anybody who goes online wants it. It's in my Dr. Davis, Dr. Davis Infinite Health.com websites in there too, behind a paywall, unfortunately. But you can do that. It's another great fermentation vehicle, hummus. It's a great fermentation. Now, we've not performed formal counts on these alternative forms. So I can't tell you that they're equally favorable as dairy, but you can still get quite a few. But I would speculate billions, but we've not formally quantified it. But hummus is a great fermentation vehicle. Juices can be, you don't get as high numbers, but juices can be a very nice vehicle. Now, people say, oh, it's too high in sugar. Well, that's the great thing here. Microbes convert the sugar to other metabolites. Here's a great thing to know about. Saccharomyces boulardii apple cider. It's a delicious effervescent cider. I take a commercial product. It's called Florastor. It's Saccharomyces boulardii. It's a cousin of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the fungus used to ferment wine and beer and sourdough bread. We're going to take its cousin, Saccharomyces boulardii, a capsule of it, pour it into a quart or more of apple cider, not apple juice, apple cider, with no preservatives, no potassium sorbate or any of that stuff. Cap it lightly, and then keep it on your counter for 48 hours. The sugar will be much reduced and converted to CO2 and other things. You cap it lightly because if you don't, it can explode. At 24 hours, you'll watch this thing. You'll see it bubbling. It's making so much carbon dioxide. And if you agitate it, it's like a can of soda, So, but then refrigerate after 48 hours, drink a quarter cup or so, a couple times a day, and it is an incredibly effective way to rebuild your microbiome, and it's virtually without cost. You do have to buy the microbe first. And by the way, once you make that effervescent cider, you can use some of the cider, a couple tablespoons, add it to some fresh apple cider, and make another one. You don't have to buy the commercial product again. So this is also, by the way, a very wonderful way to save money. Yeah, you do buy like if you do the Avivo Infantis, got to buy it. It's like $79. It ain't cheap. But you can make future batches from a prior batch, a couple tablespoons of a prior batch, likewise with Reuteri. So fermentation, while there may be a little bit of upfront cost, long-term is an incredible cost saver.
Wow, yes, no, this is great. Another question, separate from this topic, from Katie Kasmai. What are your thoughts on at-home tests for gut flora like Biome and Thorn? Are they helpful?
They can be helpful. There's a lot of uncertainties with stool testing, unfortunately. One of the things you want besides detailed analysis of which microbes are present, you also want to know how many of each microbe are present. And so some of these platforms, so I want to make sure, I'm not sure I should mention company names, but some of the platforms do not tell you how much they have. And that's useless. So you want a Gut Zoomer is probably the best commercial platform, but it's really expensive. It's $700. Thrive, Thryve, is a very good product. Some of the older tests don't take you down to species. You really want to know species. That is, so E. coli, Escherichia coli. Escherichia is the genus. Coli is the species. We really want to know down to strain, by the way, even further. But so a lot of these stool testing services will only tell you the genus. Well, you know what? Let's take Clostridia. The Clostridia can be very bad. There's something called Clostridium difficile. That's what happens after antibiotics. It gives you bloody diarrhea. You can die of it. There's Clostridium perfringens that causes gas gangrene and war wounds. There's Clostridium botulinum that causes botulism in canned foods. But then there's Clostridium butyricum, wonderful and beneficial. Same genus, different species. Very big differences, right? So what happens if a stool testing service says, you've got Clostridia? Well, which one is it? So you can see the problem here. So we have to be careful about that. This is an ongoing conversation because those testing platforms are evolving. One of the followers of my programs did something interesting. He took the same, sorry, we got to talk about poop, right? He took the same stool sample, sent it to 4 different companies, got 4 different results.
Wow.
So there's, and then, you know, if you talk to some microbiologists like my friend, Dr. Raul Cano, with a 40-year history in academic microbiology, he'll tell you, no. We're going to collect the entire bowel movement. And he did this, by the way, homogenize it so that because what you get in a stool sample is what's in the rectum and may not reflect what's in the ascending colon or transverse colon, certainly not in the small bowel. And yet we're trying to make decisions, for instance, what's in the small bowel. You can't do that. So take any stool testing platform with a grain of salt. It can yield useful information. Now you'll get thousands of pieces of data out of that. So, and I wish I could tell you, go to your doctor and show them the results. They won't know what it means 99.9% of the time. So, but you know, you guys are geniuses at crowdsourcing wisdom, right? That's the world we live in now, where it's not the purported expert, the doctor who knows has the answers. It's us who collaborate, crowdsource. And you can come on to sites like my Dr. Dave's Infinite Health, and you can actually post your microbiome result. What does this mean? And we say, oh, you've got 3% Akkermansia, could be better. Let's add some FOS. You've got this species of Clostridium. That may not be so good. You're lacking Firmicutes. So there's all kinds of different things. You don't have enough Fecalibacterium prausnitzii. So all kinds of things. I don't expect you to remember all this, by the way. But the point is that you want to go someplace to people who will help you get the answers. And sadly, you won't get it in a hospital or a doctor's clinic.
Yeah, and this is a good segue for another question from Katie Kasmai. Any thoughts on Shifaxan, a targeted intestinal antibiotic as a treatment for SIBO?
Let me tell you something really exciting. So Xifaxan is an antibiotic. It's not absorbed, and it has about 40 to 60% effectiveness when you have 30 feet of microbes filling the colon and upper GI. This is the part we didn't talk about in the presentation. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. Terrible problem because you have trillions of microbes. They only live, right, minutes to hours. They don't live decades. So if you have trillions of microbes in 30 feet of GI tract, turning over very rapidly, when they die, a lot of their breakdown products enter the bloodstream. Very important process called endotoxemia, relatively recently validated by a Belgian group in 2007. But it explains how, by the way, 30 feet, trillions of microbes, some of their products enter the bloodstream, and it explains now, finally, how microbes in the GI tract can be responsible for psoriasis or or other skin diseases? How can be responsible for depression or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's dementia or Parkinsonism, or joint diseases like fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis? Intestinal microbes can exploit their effects all those organs. So one of the ways to deal with that is to take rifaximin or Xifaxan. 40 to 60% effective. If your doctor even knows about it, they'll hand you a prescription. It's very expensive, not covered by insurance, has imperfect efficacy, and the doctor typically does not tell you how you got it, how to prevent its recurrences, which are very common. We went through a period where we were using herbal antibiotics. There are two regimens that have efficacy proven, at least in one study: the Candibactin regimen and the FC-cytodispyoside regimen. And those are pretty effective, probably more effective than the rifaximin, because in that trial, the herbal antibiotics were compared to rifaximin. The herbal antibiotics did better, and the rifaximin failures were successfully eradicated by these herbal antibiotics. But I'll tell you something now, but let me qualify this. This is very preliminary, about 30 people. When you take, so we talk about this, when you take a probiotic, will it eradicate your SIBO? No. It might reduce bloating and diarrhea a little bit, but it won't get rid of the SIBO. There's still going to be 30 feet of microbes, right? So I asked different questions. I asked, what if we chose microbes that colonize the upper GI tract? That's where SIBO is, right? And what if we chose microbes that are producers of bacteriocins? Those are natural antibiotics produced by bacteria effective against a species of SIBO, like E. coli and Klebsiella. So I chose three. I chose a strain of Lactobacillus gasseri, which colonizes upper GI tract and produces up to 7 bacteriocins, a bacteriocin powerhouse. Reuteri, our good friend Reuteri, colonized the upper GI tract, remember that? And produced up to 4 bacteriocins. I added Bacillus coagulans, a strain of Bacillus coagulans. We co-ferment as yogurt, so we get those big numbers. We consume half cup per day. And so far, 30 people or so it's very preliminary. It's not a clinical trial. It's just anecdote in my audience. 30 people have done it. 90% have converted to negative hydrogen gas on this device. Another thing to know about the AIRE device, AIRE. Once again, I have no reason to tell you that, except it's a very cool device. Blow in it. It helps you map out where bacteria are in your GI tract. Registers on your smartphone how much hydrogen gas you're producing, but tells you where. Now, unfortunately, the inventor, Dr. Angus Short, he's a PhD engineer in Ireland, didn't realize what he invented at first. So the instructions that come with the device don't tell you how to use it for this purpose, nor tells you this is how you navigate food intolerances like nightshades and FODMAPs and fruit and fructose and all those things, histamine, right? This tells you, one, if it's a food intolerance, and two, eliminating that food is not a solution, by the way, because if you have SIBO as the cause for the food intolerance, you must address the SIBO. Because if you don't address the SIBO and choose to bury your head in the sand, SIBO long-term will lead to weight gain, rise in blood sugar, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, neurodegenerative disorders, on and on. So you don't want to bury your hand in the sand. But by the way, in the Supergut book, as well as in my websites, I tell you how to use it for these purposes, because it doesn't come with the right instructions to do that. Angus Short is a friend of mine now. They're going to change it so that in future you'll get those updated instructions.
Wow. Well, we're out of time. We could talk to you for hours, but once again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Davis. And again, thank you for writing the book, Super Gut, a 4-week plan to reprogram your microbiome, restore health, and lose weight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Thanks, everybody.